I was puzzled by the sudden angry phone call from my sister-in-law. Enough is enough. You've been leaving your newborn at our house almost every day, and both Mom and I are fed up. I was confused. What on earth are you talking about? My response only seemed to infuriate her more. Don't play dumb. You can't even take care of your own child. You're a failure as a mother. This made no sense. I don't even have a newborn. Aren't you mistaken? I've never left my child with you, and my daughter is already 3 years old. Our claims weren't matching up, and my sister-in-law was becoming increasingly agitated. However, my words seemed to make her realize something was amiss. Huh? What do you mean? This wasn't just a misunderstanding on my sister-in-law's part. As it turned out, we had both been deceived by someone's elaborate plan. Then whose baby is this? Someone had woven lie upon lie, crafting a perfect scenario. But this phone call from my sister-in-law was the beginning of the unraveling of those lies. The carefully orchestrated scheme was about to fall apart, and the final chapter of this scenario would turn out to be more ironic than anyone could have imagined. My name is Victoria. During the day, I work as a sales representative for a major bank, constantly on the move. After work, I rush to pick up my 3-year-old daughter, Audrey, from daycare. Audrey, sorry I'm late. My daughter notices me and runs over with a big smile. It's the moment that instantly washes away all the fatigue from my day. This is when I switch from sales mode to mom mode. My job as a mother begins. After getting home with my daughter, we have dinner, prepare for the next day, and take a bath. Then I put her to bed, and my day came to an end. This is my daily routine. My husband, Julian, is always busy with work and comes home late every night. So, I'm left to handle all the housework and childcare on my own. Julian and I met through work. He was the one who kindly assisted me when I visited his company for a sales call. His company is a small to medium-sized business, but it's fairly well known and its sales have been steadily increasing. As we kept running into each other, our relationship deepened, and eventually, we started dating. At the time, I was 36 and Julian was 30. Julian has a very kind and gentle personality, and I felt comfortable around him. I started to think about marriage. Then, something wonderful happened. I found out I was pregnant. Of course, Julian was overjoyed, and we quickly got married. We promised to share both the joys and sorrows, and build a happy home together. However, our actual married life was far from my ideal. Victoria, you left the laundry out overnight again. If you leave dirty clothes sitting, they'll start to smell and develop stains. Don't you want your husband to always wear clean shirts? Appearance is crucial in business, you know. We chose a rental apartment near Julian's parents' house at his request. But for me, it turned out to be a hellish choice. After we got married, I realized that Julian hadn't really separated from his mother. He was what you'd call a mama's boy. Julian talked to his mother on the phone every day, neglecting time with me. Surprisingly, most of their conversations were about complaining about me. After hearing Julian's complaints, his mother would come to our house early in the morning to lecture me. "I'm doing the laundry now. I had such bad morning sickness last night that I couldn't move." Of course, I understand how important a clean appearance is for business. I wasn't being lazy. My morning sickness has not subsided since getting pregnant, so I occasionally had to leave work early or take days off. The next morning after such days, I'd hear, "Must be nice to laze around in bed all day. If you're going to skip work, at least do the housework perfectly. Julian is working his tail off while you're sleeping. At least make dinner for Julian." Even though Julian's mother had been through pregnancy and childbirth herself, why couldn't she understand my condition? While I could barely eat and was exhausted both physically and mentally, my mother-in-law showed no mercy. "Pregnancy isn't an illness. Stop being such a baby." I began to wonder if I was the one in the wrong. I was too worn out to even figure out what was right or wrong anymore. Of course, a pregnant woman with a big belly is going to struggle. If you can't handle it, you're not fit to be a mother. My mother-in-law's attacks were relentless. "You're already 37, aren't you? If you were a younger bride, maybe, but at your age, you shouldn't be complaining." I had never once complained to Julian or his mother. Yet for some reason, my mother-in-law always had some nasty comments for me. If only we had found a younger wife. It seemed my mother-in-law didn't like that I was older than Julian. Age isn't something you can change. But you can change your environment. I hoped that once the baby was born, my mother-in-law's attitude would change and she'd accept me. Maybe we could build a good relationship through the child. That's what I was hoping for. 6 months later, I safely gave birth to our daughter. However, my mother-in-law showed no interest in her granddaughter. While I was on maternity leave, struggling with first-time motherhood, my mother-in-law and Julian frequently went out together. When Julian came home and saw the messy room, he'd report it to his mother. Then she'd barge into our home and yell at me. This became a daily occurrence. Julian's attachment to his mother seemed to grow even stronger after our daughter was born. It seemed he couldn't accept becoming a father himself. And he wanted to remain his mother's son forever. His mother felt the same way, apparently loving her son more than anyone. Their bond grew stronger by the day, and I was at my wit's end. When our daughter turned 1, she was accepted into daycare, and I returned to work. Around that time, Julian became busier at work, and his return home got later and later each day. One day, I happened to see Julian's pay stub. He's working so much overtime every day, but there's no overtime pay. What's going on? Julian doesn't get home until after midnight because of overtime. Yet, his hard work isn't reflected in his paycheck. I found this puzzling. Well, we're a small company, you know. Unlike big corporations, overtime is just expected. That's how it is for most small businesses. Julian defended his company. But this violates labor laws. It's far too exploitative. A few hours of overtime a month is one thing, but this is ridiculous. Why don't you talk to the company about it? Julian's face turned red as he raised his voice at me. Are you trying to get me fired? Listen, don't you dare say anything about this. This was the first time Julian had ever raised his voice at me. I was shocked and couldn't find any words to say. Why was he defending the company so strongly? There must be some other reason. I couldn't help but have such thoughts. A few years have passed, and our daughter is now 3. She's prone to asthma and visits the hospital occasionally, but otherwise, she's growing up healthy. As usual, I was out making sales calls. I could see my breath in the cold air as I walked down the sidewalk, feeling the approach of winter. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was from our daughter's daycare. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk and answered the phone with cold hands. The daycare worker on the other end hurriedly reported that our daughter had developed a fever. She had been so energetic when we left for daycare this morning. Had she caught a cold in this chilly weather? I cut my work short and rushed to the daycare. Our daughter was limp and seemed to be having trouble breathing. When I picked her up, her body was alarmingly hot. Feeling that this was no ordinary situation, I rushed her to the pediatrician. According to the examination, our daughter's asthma had worsened, her blood oxygen levels had dropped, and she was in a dangerous condition. It was decided that she needed to be hospitalized immediately, meaning our daughter wouldn't be able to come home for a while. I called Julian. Audrey's in the hospital. But I'm too busy with work to come. You'll have to handle everything. But why did she need to be hospitalized? Julian didn't even know our daughter had asthma. A husband who doesn't help with childcare knows nothing about his child. I already knew the answer. He'd use work as an excuse and dump everything on me. I just wanted Julian, as a father, to be worried about our daughter who was running a high fever and struggling to breathe. I wanted him to be there for me, as a husband, when I felt like my heart was breaking with worry over our daughter's condition. But such a normal family dynamic was apparently too much to ask for in my case. Our daughter's symptoms were controlled with inhalation treatments and medication, and she fell asleep. Meanwhile, I rushed home to pack a bag with the necessities for our daughter's hospital stay. That's when my phone rang. It was from my mother-in-law. What could she want at such a busy time? Maybe she'd heard about our daughter's hospitalization and wanted to help somehow. Or was it another nasty phone call? I nervously answered the phone. What were you thinking? I heard Audrey's in the hospital. And with severe asthma, no less. As soon as she opened her mouth, my mother-in-law started berating me. Just as I thought, it was a nasty call. To let a child develop asthma, there must be something wrong with your parenting. I bet you're living in a filthy apartment that you never bother to clean. The air must be so polluted. No matter how much I tried to deny it, my mother-in-law's words wouldn't stop. If you had been careful about her diet, this wouldn't have happened. I bet you've been feeding her nothing but junk that causes asthma. Don't tell me you've been feeding Julian the same dirty food in that polluted apartment. Audrey is one thing, but if anything happens to Julian, you'll have hell to pay. I needed to get back to the hospital where my daughter was waiting. I didn't have time to listen to this nonsense. Besides, what kind of food causes asthma? This was beyond ridiculous. I'm heading to the hospital now, so I'll have to excuse myself. I forcibly ended the call. I'm sure my mother-in-law was red-faced with anger on the other end of the line. But I had reached my limit too. What was my mother-in-law thinking? Doesn't she care at all that her granddaughter is suffering? My anger was boiling over, and my hand holding the phone was shaking. I impulsively called Julian. I was about to be busy going back and forth between the hospital and home. If he wasn't going to help, I wanted him to tell his mother to stop calling and interfering. I wanted Julian to understand my distress too. Don't tell me that. There's nothing wrong with what Mom's saying. You've been neglecting housework, using work as an excuse. It's your lack of management that led to Audrey ending up like this. Instead of understanding my distress, even Julian was lecturing me. I haven't been neglecting anything. I might not be able to do everything, but I'm doing the essentials. I had no allies. It was a mistake to even hope that Julian would understand. I hung up the phone with a heavy heart. I couldn't stop the tears from falling. During our daughter's hospital stay, I took time off work to focus on taking care of her and managing the household. I was constantly going back and forth between the hospital and home, with hardly any time to rest. Meanwhile, Julian continued to come home late, leaving his dirty laundry strewn about. Receipts and used tissues were scattered on the table. He even left his breakfast dishes out. Julian showed no intention of helping me at all. With a heavy heart, I cleaned up after him every day. One day, as I was cleaning at home, my mother-in-law suddenly showed up. I heard you left the laundry hanging on the balcony without bringing it in. Julian's shirt got damp because of you. Julian must have been complaining about me behind my back again. I had stayed overnight at the hospital that day and couldn't return home. Couldn't Julian have brought in the laundry himself? And the orange juice in the fridge is past its expiration date. That's Julian's favorite juice. Make sure you manage things properly and buy new juice. If he likes the juice so much, he could have finished it before it expired. Julian could buy his own juice. Just because you're taking care of your daughter in the hospital doesn't mean you can neglect your housework. You can leave Audrey at the hospital. Julian is working so hard. Don't you think you should support your husband more? You really are a useless wife. I was exhausted. My heart was so numb that I felt nothing no matter what my mother-in-law said. Audrey is only 3, so there's a limit to what she can do on her own. Julian can think and act for himself to some extent. If you're so worried, why don't you take care of him yourself? Finally, my true feelings slipped out. What did you just say? Fortunately, my voice was so quiet that my mother-in-law didn't hear me properly. Don't mumble. If you have something to say, say it clearly. I turned my back to her loud voice that pierced my ears. I'm going to the hospital now, so excuse me. Please buy the orange juice yourself." With that, I left the house. My mother-in-law was still saying something, but I closed the door without looking back. "Please, I just want to be left alone." I was at my limit from overwork and stress. Still, I hurried to the hospital where my daughter was waiting. During our daughter's hospital stay, neither Julian nor his mother ever came to visit. I asked Julian several times to come see our daughter, but he always refused, citing work as the reason. Our daughter made a full recovery and was discharged after a few weeks in the hospital. After being discharged, she needed to rest at home for a few days. With our daughter's condition stabilized, I felt some of the weight lift from my shoulders. Julian still came home late and showed no interest in our daughter. The conversations between us as a couple gradually decreased. "Your daughter's been discharged, hasn't she? Even a useless person like you should be able to handle the housework perfectly now. If you can't manage it, you're a failure as a wife." While I was busy taking care of our daughter and doing housework, my mother-in-law called me almost every day. She never offered to help with our daughter's care, nor did she say a single word of concern about her granddaughter's health. She only called to criticize me. "You really are a useless wife. This is why I hate older women." Recently, her comments had shifted from criticizing my housework to attacking me personally. It seemed my mother-in-law just wanted to find a reason to criticize me. Being called a useless wife every day was starting to take its toll on me mentally. One day, I tried to talk to Julian about it. "If you're such a useless wife, of course Mom's going to say that. If you don't want to hear it from her, try harder." As expected, Julian took his mother's side. "Don't come complaining to me about this. I'm exhausted. This is another reason why you're useless. Think about my well-being more. And the fact that you can't get along with Mom is a problem in itself. You're making such a kind woman angry every day. You need to reflect on your own words and actions. You really are hopeless." Far from supporting me, he wouldn't stop berating me. Regretting that I had even tried to confide in Julian, I left the room. I decided then that I wouldn't rely on anyone anymore. After that, Julian and I stopped talking altogether. Julian's return home got even later, and we barely spent any time together as a couple. Julian even started staying out overnight. For multiple nights in a row. On the rare occasions he did come home, he'd just throw his dirty clothes on the floor, pack some clean clothes in his bag, and leave again. Was this really all because of work? I couldn't believe that anymore. The nasty phone calls from my mother-in-law continued as usual. A poorly educated older wife is far worse than a young, well-bred girl. Lately, my mother-in-law's criticisms hinted at the existence of another woman. But she didn't need to tell me that. I had already noticed. While my daughter was in the hospital, I was cleaning up the scattered receipts on the table when I happened to see it. A receipt for women's stockings and underwear. Julian couldn't possibly have any overtime. On my way back from the hospital, I happened to run into Julian's boss. It was the boss I had met several times when I visited Julian's company for sales calls. He had even gladly given a speech at our wedding. We were both indebted to him. Our company is famous for not having overtime. We even turn off the lights in the office when it's time to go home. I was shocked by the boss's words. Julian had been lying to me, spending every night with another woman. He was having an affair. I had been agonizing over this all by myself. Should I endure this for our daughter's sake, or should I consider divorce? I couldn't come to a decision. One day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Who could it be? Due to the daily calls from my mother-in-law, I had become sensitive to the sound of my phone ringing. I nervously answered the phone. To my surprise, it was my sister-in-law. She's 5 years younger than Julian and lives with her parents. She's busy with work and has an active social life, so we rarely see each other and only interact about once a year. Enough is enough. How dare you leave your newborn at our house almost every day? What are you thinking? Both Mom and I are fed up. My sister-in-law's sudden outburst caught me off guard. What? What are you talking about? My instinctive response seemed to anger her even more. What do you mean, what? Don't play dumb. You can't even take care of your own child. You're a failure as a mother. This made no sense at all. I don't even have a newborn. And I've never once left my daughter with them. I've been taking care of my daughter all by myself. I tried to calm my confused mind. Aren't you mistaken? I've never left my child with you, and my daughter is already 3 years old. I don't have a newborn. Our claims weren't matching up, and my sister-in-law was becoming increasingly agitated. However, my words seemed to make her realize something was amiss. She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. What do you mean? I was told it was Victoria's child. Both Mom and I are exhausted from taking care of the baby every day. Then whose child is this? I didn't know either. Whose child were my sister-in-law and mother-in-law taking care of? I don't know either, but who's been bringing this child and saying these things? My sister-in-law answered, confused, my brother. He brings the child, saying you asked him to. I had never said such a thing. And what was my mother-in-law thinking? She should know our daughter is already 3 years old, so why would she accept this mysterious newborn? Is there some reason they're taking care of this baby? Or maybe. I had an ominous feeling about their inexplicable behavior. Let's investigate who this baby really is. My sister-in-law agreed over the phone. A few days later, I visited my in-laws' house. My brother just brought the child, my sister-in-law whispered in my ear as she quietly opened the front door. I nodded and entered the house silently. I could hear Julian and his mother's cheerful voices coming from the living room. They must be playing with the baby. I peeked through a crack in the door to observe them. Julian was cooing at the child in an unnaturally high-pitched voice, his expression unsettlingly cheerful. He had never spoken to our daughter with such an expression. I was stunned. So it was true after all. I had evidence but didn't want to believe my husband's infidelity. However, I could no longer turn a blind eye to the reality before me. Just then, Julian said, "Well, Daddy has to go to work now, so be a good girl, okay?" He stood up, still wearing that cheerful expression, and came out of the living room. What? Our eyes met in the hallway, and Julian's eyes widened in shock, his face instantly draining of color. He seemed at a loss for words at my unexpected appearance. Julian froze, as if turned to stone. "Julian, what's wrong?" his mother said, approaching him with the baby in her arms. Then she peeked out from behind Julian. "Why are you here?" She was shocked to see me and seemed a bit flustered. She desperately tried to hide the baby she was holding. "You seem to be having so much fun with your mistress's child, while neglecting our own family," I said. I had been patient, pretending not to notice my husband's affair. Now all the evidence was in place. It was time to settle things with these two. Mistress's child. What are you talking about? How rude. Apologize this instant. My mother-in-law jumped to Julian's defense, as he stood there looking suspicious. "You're the one being rude. After all the times you've insulted me. You must have known about this all along." Then I turned to Julian. "You must have enjoyed having an affair with such a young woman." With that, I scattered dozens of photographs on the floor. "What is this?" My sister-in-law was aghast when she saw the photos. Every single one showed Julian with a young woman. There were photos of Julian and the woman arm in arm, entering a hotel. And photos of the woman holding a baby, the three of them walking down the street together. Of course, that baby was the newborn my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been taking care of. "This child is from your affair. You're the worst. What have you been doing?" Julian remained motionless. Only sweat was trickling down his cheeks. "There's no point in making excuses. I've investigated everything," I said, thrusting the documents I'd received from the private investigator at Julian. The woman he was having an affair with was the daughter of the president of one of Julian's client companies. Julian had started a relationship with her around the time our daughter was born. Of course, the overtime was a lie. Julian left work on time every day and went straight to his mistress's house. "You're truly the worst. What were you planning to do?" Julian trembled as he finally opened his mouth. The mistress's pregnancy had been an unexpected development. Julian had hidden the fact that he was married, so the woman believed he was single. When she became pregnant and started pressing for marriage, Julian was at a loss. Finally, unable to resolve the situation on his own, he consulted his mother. At first, his mother was shocked and blamed Julian. However, the mistress was younger than Julian and the daughter of a company president. His mother quickly took a liking to her and suggested that Julian divorce me and marry this woman instead. But since Julian was already married, he couldn't marry her right away. He lied about family circumstances and promised to take care of the child at his parents' house when the woman went out, in exchange for her waiting for marriage. The woman then started leaving the child at his parents' house almost every day. Julian's mother, who fully supported his marriage to the mistress, took on the childcare. To keep it a secret from Julian's sister, they lied and said it was my child. How many more lies were you planning to tell? You've lied to me, your mistress, her family, and even your own sister. When would it ever be enough? I said, but my sister-in-law was too stunned to speak. I'm sorry, Julian bowed his head to me and his sister. Did he think this would solve the problem? But I wasn't going to let him have his way so easily. We're not the only ones you need to apologize to. There's another family who's furious with you. Julian turned pale at my words. No, you don't mean. Yes, that's exactly what I meant. I had already told the mistress's family everything. You really had the nerve to lie to your client's president about being single. If this gets out, it's not just your personal reputation that will be ruined, but the company's as well. You're kidding, right? Julian fell to his knees, his face ashen. Unfortunately, I'm not a liar like you. The woman's parents were furious. They said they're going to sue you. Julian trembled and held his head in his hands. Then, cornered and with nowhere to run, the most unexpected words came out of Julian's mouth. It's not my fault. This all happened because of Mom's orders. I just followed what Mom told me to do. It's not my fault. If they're going to sue anyone, they should sue Mom. I was shocked by Julian's sudden change in attitude. His mother's orders. Wasn't it Julian's responsibility for having an affair and fathering a child? His mother couldn't stay silent in the face of such behavior from her son. How dare you speak to your parents like that? And what do you mean, my orders? You're the one who came to me for advice. I bent over backwards to clean up your mess and even took care of the baby for you. An ugly argument broke out between the two. Shut up. You're the one who told me to leave everything to you. This is the result. How are you going to take responsibility? Julian's reasoning was utterly foolish. Take responsibility. You're the irresponsible one for fathering a child with another woman in the first place. It seemed like their low-level bickering would never end. I stepped between them and handed Julian divorce papers. From now on, we'll communicate through lawyers. Sign this and submit it to the city office. With that, I left my in-laws' house. After all the time she's helped you, you blame your mother when things go south. You're the worst. Grow up already, you mama's boy. It seemed my sister-in-law had given up on Julian as well. And so, the battle came to an end. I walked away without looking back, ready to start a new chapter in my life. A few weeks later, our divorce was finalized through our lawyers. Given the numerous pieces of evidence of infidelity and my statements, I was awarded a substantial amount of alimony from my ex-husband. He was also required to pay monthly child support. Our daughter doesn't seem to have any particular feelings about her father's absence. It's not surprising, considering he never spent time with her and she has no memories with him. Moreover, my ex-husband was also sued by his mistress. She was deeply shocked to learn that he had lied about being single and gotten her pregnant. As a result, he had to pay her a large sum in damages and child support as well. Julian could no longer afford rent and had to move back in with his parents. He worked at his company during the day and took on part-time jobs at night, working from morning till night. However, even this wasn't enough to quell the anger of his client, the company president. Finally, the president decided to terminate their business relationship with Julian's company. This led to Julian's misdeeds becoming known throughout the company, and he lost his position. Unable to bear the cold stares from his colleagues, Julian was forced to resign. With the loss of his main income from the company and difficulty finding new employment, Julian had to juggle multiple part-time jobs, working himself to exhaustion every day. Even so, his monthly salary disappeared into payments to me and his mistress, and he had to rely on his mother's savings for living expenses. It's pathetic that at your age, you still need your parents to feed you. Hurry up and find a proper job, and get out of this house. The once close relationship between Julian and his mother had crumbled when money became involved. Shut up. I'm working as hard as I can. It's not like I want to be living here. Apparently, they argue every day now. The mama's boy I once knew was nowhere to be found. When my savings run out, we'll have to sell this house. Find a job before that happens. Tired of these daily arguments, Julian's sister moved out and started living on her own. It was a smart choice. If she had stayed, they probably would have started relying on her income too. A few months later, I happened to pass by my former in-law's house. However, the house I knew had been torn down, and a new one built in its place. It seems Julian hadn't been able to find a job after all. His sister, fed up with Julian and his parents constantly asking her for money, had apparently cut ties with them completely. No one knows where Julian and his mother have gone. After the divorce, I moved to a new area and am enjoying a fresh start in life with my daughter. I'm still busy juggling work, housework, and childcare. It's a struggle, but my days are fulfilling. Mama, I'm off to daycare. Today too, my daughter heads off to daycare full of energy. Have a good day. I watch her back as she leaves. Now, it's time for me to head to work. And so, another new day begins.